Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of Shadow of Destiny, known everywhere else in the world as Shadow of Memories, which is actually a more appropriate title given the story of the game. It was a 2000 release on the PlayStation 2, which was then ported over to the PlayStation Portable all the way in 2009. The game starts with the protagonist's murder and his second chance at life by making a deal with the djinn Homunculus. The entire game is set solely in the fictional German town of Lebensbaum throughout more than 400 years of its history, as we travel back and forth through time, changing events and seeing how those changes affect the future of all, in an attempt to stop your fated death, even as fate tries to keep up with you and find new ways of killing you, as you change history and discover the truth about your forgotten past and the identity and motive of your murderer. The game is solely targeted towards gamers who enjoy a slower, more intellectual experience, something that makes you ask questions and test your puzzle-solving abilities rather than the speed of your trigger finger. Even when a puzzle seems simple or a meaning seems less than subtle, there's always going to be underlying questions of morality, mortality, and destiny that make you think about your own life, not just the world of the game. There's little action to speak of. No jumping, no fighting, no quick time events. The entire game is basically walking and talking, and solving the puzzles of altering time and weighing the consequences. Most choices in the game come with both positive and negative results, and it's a matter of determining the best choice while understanding how each choice fits into the greater puzzle, so you don't make what seems to be the best choice for now, only later to determine that it negatively affects something much later in the game. Across its 10 chapters, the game's narrative is deceptively linear. The digipad, the device you use to travel through time, begins to glow each time Destiny draws you to a particular time period, but you don't necessarily have to go right there. You might be able to do more in the time period that you're in that'll help you out later on. And certain choices occasionally may seem obvious. In fact, working your way through to the first ending is fairly simple, mostly common sense, with a few odd twists, but that ending feels anticlimactic, and the path to it doesn't answer all the questions it brings up. That's because the game has a total of 8 endings depending on your choices, and each path reveals major plot twists that the others ignored. You have to find your way to each ending to get the whole story, and even then, while the game does have what's considered a true ending, it still somewhat leaves it up to the player to determine which ending they most identify with. Without a guide, navigating your way to all 8 endings could take you more than 10 playthroughs, but thankfully you can skip any story sequence you've already seen. The first few playthroughs can take as much as 5 or 6 hours each, but by the end you'll have the choices so memorized, and because you can skip many of the cutscenes, you can beat it in under 15 minutes. Seriously. The most intriguing thing about Shadow of Destiny is seeing the changes in the town in each time period. Buildings and streets change, and even appear or disappear as you travel. It's fascinating to see the same inhabitants 20 years earlier, or visit their ancestors 100 and even 400 years into the past, and to see how your actions in the past changed their lives. The lives of the other characters are actually a huge part of the many threads of the main plot, and even the town itself is practically a character. Since the game takes place in only one town, it allowed the developers the time to really work on every detail of the town in each time period. And while the game's engine isn't the best, even for its time, and there are a lot of low-res issues, the details can often be amazing, and there is better use of lighting and different textures than in even many bigger budget games of the time. The character models themselves aren't the most detailed, but their movement is realistic, and the facial expressions are particularly well done. The game is visually at its best at night or when it's snowing, because the darkness or falling snow covers up most of the visual flaws, while the flawless use of light is more apparent. Sadly, the only time the character animation falls short is with the main character himself. His running animation, which you will spend maybe a quarter of the time looking at, is awkward. Without giving any of the plot away, I'll say that every character in the game is well written, the dialogue is great, and the voice acting is fantastic as the soundtrack. The djinn Homunculus is by far the shining performance. So much so that a spin-off game focused solely on the story of Homunculus I would buy in a second. What really works is that the more plot you reveal with each playthrough, the more characters fall out of that clear-cut good guy, bad guy role into a realm of gray. The developers even went so far as to put a different filter on the camera for each time period, like a gray filter over everything in the early 1900s, or a grainy, old film-like brownish filter for the 1580s. The PlayStation Portable port, released 9 years later, is almost an exact copy of the PS2 game, which is a bit of a shame. What was a great presentation in 2000 is very, very outdated by 2009, and on the PSP's crisp, beautiful screen, some of the minor graphical issues stand out even more. There is some additional content, but it's primarily in the form of more inhabitants in the town to talk to, and they're not always important to the plot. Some of the voice work has been redone for this release, and maybe it's nostalgia, but I wasn't a fan of the new voice actors. I think it's more because of the uncomfortable feeling of seeing a familiar face and hearing a different voice come out of his or her mouth. Personally, I prefer the original version, and since it's also easier to find and usually cheaper, the PSP version is good, but if you're going to re-release a game almost a decade later, there should really be more enhancements and additional content. The game's slow pace, especially in the first hour, does have a fairly slow opening, isn't really going to be for everyone, but for those who are interested in a type of game like this, it's definitely a must-buy. It's a fantastic game, and honestly, it's one of the very few games that both my wife and I enjoy equally, so definitely give it a shot.